Hi AP Psychology students, and welcome back. Today we are continuing our discussion of personality theories, and we are ending up with the final theory. This is called trait theory, and I leave this theory for last because it's a little bit different than the other ones, which we'll get into. But this aligns with topic 4.5, excuse me, social, cognitive, and trait theories. And personality, the learning objective is explain how trait theories of personality define and assess personality. So, the essential questions are, what does trait theory believe influences or drives our personality, and how can we assess the personality from this perspective? So when we talk about trait theory, what makes it different is that trait theory does not explain personality. Like, it doesn't give me any idea of how you got to be the way you are. Not because they don't care, but because they think it's mostly genetic. That our temperament, our reactability, our nervous system, our openness, whatever it is something that we're kind of born with, right? And a lot of research has backed this up, that a lot of our personality is based on our genetics, or is what they call heritable. So instead of focusing on explaining it, what they care about is describing it. They want to create a system that describes personality in a consistent way. Really what they focus on is identifying consistent and stable traits, and then giving you a sense of where you and others kind of fall on those traits, and how similarities or differences in people can help us understand, different types of behavior patterns, or different ways that people go about, experiencing the world. Now, the question that goes along with this is, if you're trying to identify consistent and stable traits, how many different words are there to describe humans, right? Like, how are you're going to measure all of the different words that describe people? There are actually, when they first looked at this, there was 18,000 words in the dictionary that were words that describe humans: kind, smart, intelligent, outgoing, caring, any of those words, right? There was 18,000 of them, and that is way too many to assess. So what do? We use a process called factor analysis. So factor analysis is a statistical procedure where they actually figure out how terms, words or ideas go together. Like, what is the larger category that all these ideas are a part of? And then instead of just looking at each individual term, they look at the larger category. So what does this look like? Okay, let's say we're taking these words that are, adjectives. They're words that describe human people, right? Humanity, human people. Honest, friendly, outgoing, quiet, competitive, kind, talkative, right? So the question is, do any of these kind of go together maybe, or relate to a bigger idea? So just kind of looking at this, I feel like the idea of outgoing and being quiet and talkative kind of go together, which I also feel like could relate to being friendly. I feel like honesty and competitiveness also relate, and then maybe kindness and competitiveness, right? So what would they do is they would think about how these terms relate to 2 or 3 or 4, whatever it is, larger categories. So honesty would go in agreeableness. Friendliness is a little bit of extroverted and a little bit of agreeableness, so some words go in multiple categories. Outgoing goes with the extroverted. Quiet goes with the extroverted. Competitive goes with agreeable. Kind goes with agreeable. Talkative goes with extroverted. And then instead of measuring all of those separately, you measure extroverted and agreeable, and you get at all of those ideas, right? That's what factor analysis is. So when using this idea of factor analysis, here's a little bit of a very brief history of how many different traits and which traits we looked at over time. So Gordon Allport was the first trait theorist, and he took those 18,000 traits and brought them down to 200, and kind of thought that there was 3 levels of traits, like cardinal traits, which is really true of you, central traits, which are kind of true, and secondary traits, which are kind of on the edge of your personality. However, 200 is still too many, and so then another psychologist came along named Robert Cattell, and he came up with the 16 personality factors, right, out of 200. And you can see them listed, the factors, and then the high score and the low score. Then Eysenck took the 16 factors and said, you know what, really I think we could put them into 2 dimensions. So his dimensions were introverted or extroverted, and then stable and unstable in terms of the emotions, which we later call neurotic. And the model we use today most commonly is called the 5-factor model. And this takes some of the ideas of Cattell and some of the ideas of Eysenck. It says that 2 dimensions is probably not enough, that we need more. However, if you look at this, you can see neuroticism and extroversion, which are both part of Eysenck, are included in the 5-factor model. And if you go up to Cattell's, you can see that introversion is also listed there, and aggressiveness or emotional stability, which goes with neuroticism. So it's not that they are totally different theories, but just how they've evolved over time. So let's talk specifically about the 5 factors in the 5-factor model, also known as the Big 5. The first one is openness, right? So openness has to do with your imagination, how much you like different ideas or feelings or actions. If you have a low openness score, you tend to be very practical, very conventional, you like routines, more conservative, you're very rational. Whereas if you have a high score in openness, you tend to be more curious, you like to be spontaneous, you have a very wide range of interests, you might be more liberal, or open to alternative lifestyles or ideas that maybe seem outside of the quote-unquote norm. The next trait is conscientiousness. And this is the idea of like how self-disciplined, thoughtful, goal-driven you are. So low conscientiousness is you tend to be more impulsive, careless, disorganized, kind of carefree. Sometimes people think of this as like being type B. And then if you are more conscientious, high, then it would be hardworking, dependable, organized. Sometimes people think of this as type A. However, it's not exactly accurate, but there are definitely qualities of each of those in high and low conscientiousness. Extroversion. So extroversion is how sociable you are, right? So how much energy do you get from being around others or being kind of in small groups? So if you are low in extroversion, you are quiet, reserved, and withdrawn. And if you are high in extroversion, you tend to be outgoing, warm. You seek adventure. You like to be in big groups. You get energy from the people around you. In this case, extroversion is there's a word for low extroversion, and it's called introversion. So not all of the Big 5 traits have like a word for each side, but in this case, extroversion is the high side and introversion would be the lower side. Agreeableness. So this is how cooperative, trustworthy, kind of good-natured you are. So low on this, you might be more critical of others, more suspicious, more uncooperative, maybe even like more aggressive in nature. Whereas if you're high in agreeableness, you would be helpful, trusting, empathetic, but maybe gullible, right? So maybe, really always kind of believing in what other people say. And then the last one is neuroticism. So if you are high in neuroticism, right, you tend to be anxious, unhappy, or prone to negative emotions. And if you are low in neuroticism, you tend to be more calm, even-tempered, and secure. So your neuroticism is basically how much tendency you have towards these unstable emotions, right? And if we go back through them, you will notice that the openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, extroversion, and neuroticism, if you take the first letter of each word, each word they make up the word ocean, right? So that's oftentimes a little mnemonic that people use to help remember the Big 5 traits. Okay, so assessing the trait theory, right? We talked about how we assess the other theories, so how do we assess the Big 5 or any of the traits that we look at? So we usually use personality inventories. So personality inventories are just a questionnaire, usually a Likert scale, 1 to 5, strongly agree, strongly disagree, etc. They measure a wide range of things. And the difference, one of the biggest differences is that these are objective, in that very different than projective, where it's kind of subjective and you could kind of analyze what people say. In this one, like the scoring is done through like a computer or a systematic method where you get a certain score, right? So what are some examples of these? The Myers-Briggs you may have heard of or taken before. You get like a 4-letter score. Not seen as really valid today, but definitely still around. The MMPI, which stands for the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. This is used a lot in clinical settings to look at different personality traits of maybe people who are seeking help in clinical settings, or just people who were wanting to learn more about how they might be showing different personality patterns. And then the NEO 5-factor inventory is one that measures the big 5 explicitly. There's a few different of these, and we're going to take one of these in class. You can kind of see where you score on the big 5. All right, AP Psychos, remember to stop here and make sure you can answer these essential questions. Today we talked about the trait theory and how it's different than the other theories and what are the traits that we focus on today. That's all for now, and remember, psychology is flippin' awesome.